When you ask rangers about strange things in the woods, they'll usually smile and change the subject. But off the record, you hear a different story. These are 4 true tales park rangers refuse to talk about, and they'll make you think twice the next time you head into the wilderness. Story 1. The Disappearing Camper. Yellowstone, 1983. Yellowstone National Park, 1983. It was just after dawn when a backcountry ranger named Daniels began his patrol along one of the lesser-used trails near the Lewis River. This was the quiet part of the park. Thick stands of lodgepole pine, marshy meadows, and stretches of fog that clung to the low ground like it had nowhere else to go. Daniels had walked this route dozens of times before. Nothing unusual ever happened out here. Until that morning, he spotted the campsite from about 50 yards away. A single tent stood at the edge of a clearing, the nylon walls catching faint streaks of early light. At first, it looked completely ordinary, tidy even. Someone had set up a small fire ring and left a circle of stones still faintly warm from the night's blaze. A tin coffee mug sat balanced on a flat rock nearby, and thin curls of steam drifted into the chill air. That detail stuck with Daniels immediately. Steam. Rising as though someone had poured a cup just minutes before, he slowed, glanced around the tree line, and called out, "Morning! Ranger service!" His voice carried, echoing against the pines. No answer. He tried again. Still nothing. Cautiously, he approached the tent. The flap was unzipped, swaying slightly in the breeze. Inside, the sleeping bag was rumpled, pulled halfway back as if someone had just climbed out. A pair of boots sat neatly side by side at the entrance, their laces untied. Against the far wall of the tent leaned a backpack, zipped shut, with gear still stowed inside. It didn't make sense. The fire hadn't been doused properly. The coffee was still hot. But the camper, whoever he was gone. Daniels circled the campsite, scanning the dirt for tracks. He spotted them quickly, a single set of boot prints heading away from the tent, cutting straight through the clearing and toward the marshland beyond. The ranger followed. The prints were clear at first, crisp impressions in the damp soil. Each step was spaced evenly, purposeful. Daniels imagined a man walking with calm intent, not in a hurry, not stumbling, just walking. But when the tracks reached the edge of the marsh, something strange happened. They ended. The last 2 prints sank deep into the mud, the heels nearly swallowed, as though the man had stepped forward with his full weight. But there were no return tracks. No sideways shuffle, no drag marks or signs of a fall, just nothing. 1 step, and then gone. Daniels crouched there for a long moment, staring at the empty expanse of marsh. The water wasn't more than waist-high, anywhere in that stretch. If the camper had walked straight in, Daniels should have seen ripples, bubbles, maybe even the body itself caught in the reeds. But the surface was still, unbroken, reflecting the gray morning sky like glass. A chill ran through him. He pulled his radio from his belt and called it in. Within hours, the area swarmed with rangers, volunteers, and later search and rescue teams flown in by helicopter. They combed every inch of the marsh, dragging poles through the mud, fanning out into the trees, marking grids and rechecking them. Nothing. By the second day, dogs were brought in. Daniels remembered watching them sniff eagerly at the campsite, tails wagging as they picked up the scent. They followed the prints into the marsh, and then, just as abruptly as the tracks had ended, the dogs stopped. They whined, circled, sniffed the air, but they refused to go any farther. It was as if the scent itself had vanished. By the 3rd day, the search expanded to miles of forest beyond. Helicopters scoured the terrain. Rangers on horseback covered ridges, and divers checked the deeper pools of water. Still nothing. No clothing. no gear, no body. The official report would later say, presumed drowned, but everyone involved knew that was just a way to close the file. The marsh wasn't deep enough to hide a body. They had dragged it, drained sections of it even. If he'd drowned, they should have recovered him. But there was nothing. What stuck with Daniels most wasn't just the disappearance. It was the atmosphere of that campsite. He would later describe it as unnaturally quiet. Yellowstone in the morning usually meant birdsong, the chatter of squirrels, the distant bellow of elk. But around that tent, there had been nothing. Just silence. The kind of silence that presses against your ears and makes you feel like something is holding its breath in the trees. And there was the coffee. Daniels swore it had still been hot when he found it, which meant whoever had poured it must have been there minutes before. But if that was true, how had he vanished so completely in such a short time? Over the years, theories circulated among the rangers. Some thought the man had staged his own disappearance, walked barefoot from the marsh, hid his tracks, and vanished into the forest on purpose. But no bare footprints were ever found. Others believed he'd encountered something, or someone, out there in the woods. There were no signs of a struggle, no drag marks or blood. But maybe that was the point. Whatever had taken him hadn't needed to struggle. And then there were the stranger theories, the ones rangers only whispered late at night, when the wind rattled the cabin windows and the radios crackled with static. That Yellowstone's wilderness had places that weren't entirely normal, pockets of land where things didn't behave the way they should. Places where you could walk in and never walk out. The disappearing camper became one of those stories, passed between new recruits and old veterans alike. Daniels himself refused to talk about it much after he left the service. But in one rare conversation years later, he admitted something that never made it into the report. When he'd crouched at the edge of the marsh, staring at those final boot prints, he said he felt something watching him, not from one direction, not from a single point in the trees, but from everywhere, a gaze pressing in from all sides, heavy and suffocating. He stood there, frozen, until the hair on the back of his neck prickled so badly he had to turn and walk away. No one ever found the camper. His name never made the papers. His gear was eventually logged and removed. The case faded into the background, just another missing person in a park that has seen too many. But among the rangers who worked that summer, the memory never faded. They still talk about the campsite, the hot coffee, the silence that felt wrong. And they still wonder what happened to the man who walked into the marsh and never came back out. Story 2. The Staircase in the Woods, Appalachian Trail, 1990s. The Appalachian Trail stretches more than 2,000 miles, cutting through 14 states and some of the most rugged forested terrain in the country. Millions hike parts of it every year. But there are sections few talk about, miles deep, where the canopy swallows the light and the air feels older, heavier. It was in those stretches during the 1990s that a peculiar rumor began surfacing among rangers. It wasn't in the official reports. You wouldn't find it in public logs or trail maps. But in late-night conversations over black coffee or the hiss of a two-way radio, you'd sometimes hear it. The stairs. That's all they were described as. Staircases. Not ruins. Not remnants of cabins or houses. Not crumbling foundations. Perfect, intact staircases standing alone in the forest, as if some piece of a home had been lifted out of a neighborhood and dropped in the middle of the wilderness. One ranger, who worked near the Virginia stretch of the trail, described the first time he came across one. He'd been checking an old fire road when he spotted it through the trees, a staircase of pale wood, maybe 15 steps high, rising from the moss and leaf litter into nothing. No walls, no landing, just stairs. He said the wood looked new, not weathered, not rotting, almost like it had been built yesterday. And the strangest part? There were no tracks around it, no cut marks from dragging lumber, no flattened brush from construction, just a staircase, standing in silence, waiting. When he radioed it in, his supervisor told him something he didn't expect. Log the coordinates. Do not approach. Do not climb. And don't mention it again. That was it. No explanation. No follow-up. Another ranger, years later in Massachusetts, stumbled on something similar. Only this time the staircase was stone, like an ornate spiral ripped from a cathedral. It sat in a clearing, moss creeping up its sides, but the stonework itself looked impossibly clean. She admitted she stood there for nearly 20 minutes, staring at it, fighting the urge to walk up. She felt drawn to it. Something about the symmetry, the way the forest seemed to bend away from it, created an almost magnetic pull. But in the end, she remembered the unspoken rules she'd heard whispered in ranger cabins. Never climb them. She backed away, heart-hammering, and logged the spot. Later that night, when she told her supervisor what she'd seen, he simply shook his head. Forget it. Some things aren't meant to be explained. The story spread quietly. North Carolina, Pennsylvania, New Hampshire. Always the same description. Staircases in the middle of nowhere, untouched by weather, immune to decay, disconnected from any ruins or roads. Sometimes wood, sometimes stone, sometimes iron, with ornate railings that gleamed as though polished. And always the same instructions. Do not climb. Why? That's where the theories began. Some rangers believe the staircases were old remnants of towns swallowed by the forest, the last fragments of homes, preserved somehow while everything else decayed. But that didn't explain their condition, or why they appeared in areas where no towns had ever been recorded. Others thought they were markers, like boundary stones or ancient structures left behind by someone, or something, long before settlers ever set foot in these mountains. But the darker theories, the ones shared only in hushed tones, were the ones that stuck. One ranger swore he knew a man who climbed. This was back in '94, somewhere along the Georgia section of the trail. A younger ranger, still green, came across one of the wooden staircases and, ignoring the warnings, decided to climb. He made it to the 10th step before he froze. The others who were with him said he just stopped moving, like his body had locked in place. His breathing grew ragged. His face twisted, as if he was hearing something they couldn't. They called out, panicked, but he didn't respond. Then, without warning, he screamed a raw, piercing sound that carried through the trees and threw himself backward off the staircase. He landed hard, breaking his arm, but when the others ran to help, he wouldn't let them touch him. He just kept whispering, over and over. They were waiting for me. He left the ranger service within the month. No one saw him again. Other tales claimed climbers disappeared entirely. A hunter in Vermont, who vanished after telling friends about a stone staircase he'd found. A survey worker in North Carolina who never returned from a solo patrol. His last radio transmission, a strained voice saying, "I'll just check the top step." Search teams looked. No sign of them. Not even tracks leading away. And then there was the static. Several rangers said that whenever they were near one of these staircases, their radios would fill with interference, a low, buzzing static that seemed to rise and fall like breathing. Some swore they heard voices within it. Not words exactly, but the suggestion of them, as if something on the other end was trying to speak but couldn't quite push through. One ranger admitted he once heard his own name, clear as day, carried through the static. By the late '90s, the staircases had become a kind of folklore among rangers, never officially acknowledged, always passed along as warnings to newcomers. If you find one, don't touch it. Don't climb, don't linger. But the strangest part? They move. At least, that's what some rangers believe. A staircase logged in one area might vanish weeks later, only to appear miles away. The coordinates don't hold. The land shifts, the forest swallows, and then, suddenly, there it is again. It's almost as if the forest itself is repositioning them. Of course, nothing about them has ever made it into official park records. Ask any administrator, and they'll deny it outright. But among those who've walked the Appalachian backcountry, the unease remains. Imagine it. Miles from civilization, you push through dense undergrowth and stumble into a clearing. And there, standing as if it has every right to be there, is a staircase. Clean, intact, waiting. You might feel the pull to climb. But the old rangers will tell you, if you do, you may not come back the same. And some never come back at all. Story 3. The Night Screams. Glacier National Park, 2004. Glacier National Park is known for its staggering beauty, towering peaks, icy lakes, endless pine forests that stretch farther than the eye can see. But in 2004, 2 rangers on night patrol encountered something that didn't belong in that landscape of postcard perfection. Something that still makes its way into whispered ranger lore today. It began just past midnight. Ranger Ellis and his partner, Ranger Drew, were assigned to check the West Valley trails. The summer season was winding down, but campers were still scattered throughout the backcountry, and reports of black bears foraging near campsites had put everyone on edge. Their job was simple: sweep the trails, check for disturbances, and radio back if they saw anything out of the ordinary. They were about 3 miles into the patrol when the sound cut through the trees. At first it was faint, a high, keening cry that echoed through the valley. Ellis thought it might be a fox or even a mountain lion. But then it came again, sharper this time, breaking into a pitch that made his stomach tighten. It sounded like a woman screaming. Both men froze on the trail. The night was clear, moonlight dripping through the trees in pale streaks. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, perfectly ordinary. But that sound didn't belong. Drew muttered, "Could be an animal." His voice was steady, but Ellis noticed he didn't move forward. They stood listening, and the scream came again. Longer, louder, carrying across the treetops like it was chasing them. This wasn't the short yelp of a fox. It wasn't the drawn-out cry of a cougar. This was human. "Help me!" That's what it sounded like the next time. A ragged plea. A woman calling from the forest. They exchanged a look, then unholstered their flashlights and stepped off the trail. The scream seemed to guide them, first leading them deeper into the valley, then shifting direction, as though whatever made them was circling. Ellis noted the pattern. 3 minutes of silence, then a shrill cry that echoed far too close, then silence again. "Hello?" Drew called, his voice cracking. "Ranger Service! Can you hear me?" No reply. Only another scream. Closer this time, behind them. They spun, beams slicing the trees. Nothing moved, not even a branch swayed. As they pressed on, Ellis began noticing the trees. Several had deep gashes raked down their trunks, fresh enough that the sap was still sticky. The marks were wide apart, like something with enormous hands, or claws, had torn through the bark with ease. The trail of gouges stretched onward, leading them deeper. The screaming grew louder. At one point they broke into a clearing. The moon was high enough to paint everything in a bluish glow. In the center stood a single pine tree, its bark shredded nearly 10 feet up. Ellis ran the beam of his flashlight over it, and his throat went dry. The gashes were deep, jagged, as though something had slammed its way down the trunk with deliberate force. And then the scream came again. It tore through the clearing, so loud and so near that Ellis swore it vibrated in his chest. Both men clutched their ears instinctively. But Nothing moved. They circled, flashlights darting wildly, but the forest gave no sign of life. No birds, no rustle of animals fleeing, just the echo of the scream fading into silence. For the next 4 hours they followed it. The cries never stopped. Sometimes they sounded far away, drifting up the mountainside. Other times they seemed to burst from just behind their shoulders, close enough to make Ellis stagger forward in panic. But they never found anyone. At dawn, the sound ceased as suddenly as it had begun. The sun pushed over the ridges, painting the valley gold, and the forest came alive again. Birds chirped. Squirrels skittered. The ordinary rhythm of glacier returned, as if nothing had happened. The two rangers stood in the clearing, exhausted and pale, staring at the claw-marked trees. They returned to the station later that morning, filing their report, but the official log only noted unidentified animal vocalizations. No mention of screams, no mention of claw marks. Ellis pressed his supervisor later, asking why the details were omitted. The man only shook his head. You want people panicking? You want campers demanding refunds and pulling out in the middle of the season? But we both heard it, Ellis insisted. His supervisor gave him a flat look. Then forget it. Cougar, fox, wind through the valley. Take your pick. Just don't write it down. The incident never made the public record. No missing persons were reported that night. No campers claimed to hear anything unusual. But Ellis never forgot the sound. He swore it was human. He swore it said, "Help me," more than once. And he swore that whatever made it had claws sharp enough to shred living trees. Years later, when he left the ranger service, he finally told the story in full. His voice still shook when he described how the screams followed them for hours, never letting them rest, never showing a body. Among rangers, the tale took root. The night screams, they called it. Some said it was the spirit of a woman who had died in those woods decades earlier, her cries still echoing through the valleys. Others believed it was something older, something that mimicked human voices to lure prey. But no one denies the claw marks. Even now, hikers in that valley sometimes report strange sounds after dark. Not animal, not human, something in between. And if you ask Ellis, he'll tell you the same thing he's told every rookie ranger since. If you ever hear someone screaming in the woods at night, don't go looking. You won't find them. And whatever you do find, you won't want to see. Story 4. The Watcher in the Fire Tower. Oregon, 2012. Oregon's forests stretch for miles, thick with evergreens that seem endless when you're standing beneath them. For decades, fire towers dotted those ridges, each one perched high above the trees, giving rangers a clear view of the valleys below. Some of those towers are still manned today, relics of an older system. Others have been left to rot, boarded up, abandoned, their stairs rusting away in silence. But in the summer of 2012, a seasonal ranger swore one of those towers wasn't as empty as the maps claimed. The ranger's name was Halloran. Fresh out of school, eager to spend a summer in the woods, he'd signed up for a 3-month stint manning fire watch in the Cascades. His tower stood high on a ridge, accessible only by a winding dirt road and a steep half-mile hike. Days were long, nights were longer, but he didn't mind. The solitude suited him. One evening in late July, just as the sun began to dip behind the ridges, Halloran lifted his binoculars for a routine sweep. He scanned the valleys for smoke, tracing the dark folds of forest as the light drained from them. That's when he noticed movement in the distance. Across the valley stood another tower, older, its silhouette barely visible against the tree line. Halloran had been told during training that the structure had been abandoned for decades. No one used it, no one maintained it. The road leading to it had washed out years ago, and the stairs were considered unsafe. But through the glass, he swore he saw someone inside. A shadow passed across the window. Not a trick of the light, not the sway of trees, but a figure, tall, upright, moving deliberately from one side of the tower to the other. Halloran blinked, adjusted the focus, and looked again. The figure stood near the window now, still and dark, like someone watching him from across the valley. A chill crept up his spine. He lowered the binoculars, rubbed his eyes, then looked again. The figure was gone. He tried to laugh it off. Maybe it had been the reflection of a bird. Maybe his eyes were tired. He made a note in his logbook. Possible movement? Tower 9? Check records. And left it at that. But the next night, it happened again. This time, the figure was clearer. It moved across the room, backlit by the last slant of sunset. Halloran swore he saw the outline of arms, the tilt of a head. Someone was in that tower. Someone who shouldn't be. He radioed it in. "Dispatch, I've got possible trespassers in Tower 9, requesting confirmation on status." The reply came back flat. "Tower 9 has been decommissioned since 1973. No one should be there." "Copy?" Halloran hesitated. "Copy." He didn't report the figure itself, just logged another vague note. But when night fell, he left his lantern burning low and kept watch across the valley, waiting. And sure enough, just after midnight, a faint light flickered in the window of Tower 9. A lantern. Or a cigarette. Something glowing faintly, moving back and forth. The next day, he convinced a small crew to hike with him to the abandoned tower. They set out early, making the long trek across the valley and up the ridge where the old structure stood. It loomed above them as they approached, weathered wood, rusting bolts, steps sagging with decay. A thick chain and padlock barred the entrance, the metal orange with rust. "See," one of the crew said, "no one's been up here in decades." But when Halloran knelt to check the base of the stairs, his stomach dropped. Scattered near the first step were cigarette butts. Not old, not crumbling with age. Fresh. The filters still white, the ends burned recently. Someone had been here. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. They checked the lock again. Solid, untouched. The chain hadn't been disturbed. There was no way inside. And yet, when they circled the tower, they found more butts beneath the windows. Small piles, as though someone had stood there, smoking, staring out at the forest. Halloran insisted they report it, but when they returned to base, their supervisor dismissed the story. "Kids, maybe," he said. "Locals messing around. Just leave it. Tower's condemned." But Halloran couldn't shake the feeling. He'd seen movement in the windows. He'd seen light in the dead of night. And those cigarette butts proved someone had been there. Weeks passed. Every few nights, Halloran caught sight of it again. A shadow in the window, a glow in the dark. Always in Tower 9. Always watching. By the end of summer, he stopped reporting it. What was the point? The others didn't believe him. But before he left for the season, he made one final note in his logbook. Tower 9. Still active. Not abandoned. Someone there. Watching. Years later, when Halloran was long gone from the service, that note still sat in the files. Other rangers found it, read it, and quietly added their own. A few admitted they'd seen lights too. One swore he'd caught a figure waving. But the official record? Still blank. Tower 9 remains listed as decommissioned. Boarded. Unsafe. And yet, if you ask the right ranger in Oregon, you'll hear the same warning whispered late at night. If you're ever on fire watch, and you see a shadow moving in a tower across the valley, don't wave. Don't signal. Don't let it know you've seen it. Because the abandoned towers aren't always empty. And sometimes, what's watching you wants you to watch back. National parks are meant to protect wildlife, history, and beauty. But sometimes they hide secrets no one can explain. If you've ever experienced something strange outdoors, drop your story in the comments. And remember, the rangers might not talk about it, but the forest never forgets.